So first, so first, student perceptions. Should ChatGPT be allowed in college? About 80% of student respondents said yes, 20% said no. Would they use this technology in future college classes with the stipulation that it is allowed, right? I wasn't asking them if they're considering cheating. If the instructor allows it, would you use it? About 40% of students said yes, a little bit over 40% of students said they might, and only 12% of respondents said no. But with all of that enthusiasm there and all of that willingness, in my study, when I encouraged these students to use it as extensively as they wanted to, very few did. Less than 20 eligible assignments out of around 100 did students use this technology on. The vast majority of students on the vast majority of assignments elected not to use the technology. And perhaps most encouragingly to me, when we compare the performance between students that use this technology and students that didn't, there's no statistically significant difference between those grades. In fact, if you cheat on the statistics a little bit and you look for trends, the using cohort trended a little lower. So the use of generative AI is not giving students this huge academic performance boost that some of us are afraid of. If anything, it's level setting them. And the reason why I say level setting is because I do not have a control for, and I cannot speak to, the grades that the using cohort students would have gotten had they not used this technology. There's a chance that the using cohort doesn't have strong proficient writing skills, didn't feel comfortable with writing, maybe had poor writing instruction in their K-12 education, etc. And it's possible that had they not used Gen AI, their grades would be much lower, and the use of generative AI boosted their grades to be level with their non-using peers, peers that are presumably more comfortable and more proficient with college-level writing. Even if that's the case, is that a problem? Again, another philosophical question that we have to have. If we have a cohort of students that struggle to write with proficiency, due probably to no fault of their own, the school district they came up with, the English teachers that they had, the amount of reading that was done in the home, if these students struggle to write, should they be penalized on lab reports and science writing assignments because of that lack of preparation that they received in prior education? Is it not more fair in an equity lens or maybe a social justice lens that these students be allowed to use a technology that level sets them with their peers? Again, I don't have a stake on this perspective. I'm not sure what my own answer is to that question, but it's a conversation we need to have in education. Most troublingly, I don't think students know what they're using when they use generative AI. I asked these same students, this study was done in the end of the spring, well, during the spring 2023 semester. I asked them at the end of the semester to retrospectively recall what their opinion of this technology was at the start of the spring. And the hands down number one response was no opinion. Technology was new, they'd barely heard of it, they hadn't used it, they had no opinion. Fair enough. A very distant second was that it is an AI chat tool. That's what it is. And then a more distant third is that it's a powerful search engine. Now, if you get into the granular nitty-gritty IT of it, generative AI is not a search engine, but I think from their minds, they have a question, they go to Google, they get an answer. They have a question, they go to Gen AI, they get an answer. The answer is a little bit more cogent, a little more contextual. I understand what they mean. I asked them again at the end of the spring 2023 semester what their opinions were then, and now the number one opinion is that ChatGPT is a source of information, and that terrifies me. ChatGPT is not a source of information. It is at best a well-intentioned neighbor. It is a societal echo chamber. It reflects back the zeitgeist to us of the internet perspective. Oftentimes that information is correct, but many times that information is suspect. So is it a source of information? Sure, but I don't think that's what they mean. I think they mean information where the air quotes imply trustworthy information, expert information, and it is not that. Coming in second, an AI chat tool, and third, again, is a powerful search engine. So I think students have some misconceptions around this technology, and that's where we can come in as educators. And here's the citation for the study. It was published in March of this year in JUTLIP, the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice. So at this point in our conversation, we know that this technology is powerful. It can do many things for us. It's integrated into society, and our students will face it when they're no longer students, when they've graduated and they've joined the workforce. They are using it, they intend to use it, but they don't really understand what it is. Getting back to the good or bad slide, they don't know its strengths and its weaknesses. So that's how we can help students prepare for this inevitable future where generative AI is everywhere. We can do it through our assessments and through our assignments. We can implicitly embed the strengths and weaknesses of generative AI in what we ask our students to do with the technology. I'll give you two quick examples that I've stolen. So the first is from Alex Gill at Yale, and I should say that I shared my slides with Paul, and I'm happy with those slides being disseminated for anybody who's interested. All these hyperlinks work, so if you do want the slides, I'm more than happy to have them shared. But Gill at Yale, he no longer has students write a final paper in his classes. He has the Gen AI write the paper, same prompt as he used before this technology. But now what the student does is they serve as editor. They clean the paper up for voice. They clean the paper up for contextual relevance. And most importantly, they serve as fact checkers. They make sure that the information in the paper is correct. And then Gill has the students submit the original unedited paper that ChatGPT spit out and then their edited version, and they're graded on how they functioned as an effective editor for that work. I like this assignment because it has the students using the technology, but if you kind of see in the subtext, what's implied here is you cannot trust this information. You have to be the expert and go in and fix it because it will need fixing. Again, it gets back to those, should we be teaching critical skills around analyzing written information? Ryan Watkins at GW, he does something similar. He has what he calls a prompt competition, where students identify key questions or challenges in the field or discipline of that course of study. They break up into groups and they decide how they want to ping generative AI for responses relevant to those questions or challenges. But before they use the tool in their groups, they essentially devise rubrics. They come up with grading criteria, scoring criteria, that they're going to use to evaluate the quality and veracity of the information that the generative AI spits out. He, in a related assignment, also has students generate rubrics for the prompts themselves. Then, and only then, the student groups can apply those questions, those prompts to generative AI. They get the output, and then the student groups score the output using their rubrics. And they report out with one another what kinds of prompts gave the best information, what kinds of prompts gave weak information, and what seemed to be the overriding trends of the poor aspects of the output that generative AI is giving. Again, you can see implicitly, maybe even explicitly woven into this assignment is that generative AI content cannot be trusted. We need to go in with a critical lens and evaluate the work that's coming out. And I think that's one of the key components that we need to integrate into future assignments is having students use it with very strong guardrails, but also having as part of that assignment, students vetting that work for factual quality. And that kind of circles me back to my own citing format. Like I told you before, in my study, I allowed students to use this technology as broadly as they wanted to, but they had to use my citing format. And that's the citing format that I'll share with you. This I wrote up as or co-wrote as a educational blog post at the URL that this QR code will bring you to. But essentially it works like this. If students take Gen AI generated content verbatim, if they quote it directly, they use double quotes. If they change it in any way, they paraphrased it, edit it in any way, they use single quotes. Either way, whether it's verbatim or paraphrased, quoted material is followed with an in-text citation that gives the generative AI tool and then the number of incidents. So the first time they use ChatGPT, it would be ChatGPT, 1. The second time they use it in the paper, 2, etc. Then, after their traditional reference page, which they still have in their traditional references, they add another reference page, that's the Gen AI or ChatGPT citations page. And on that page, all of the in-text citations are annotated. And the format of those citations on the reference page is, of course, the number to link it to the in-text citation, right? So the third, ChatGPT, 3 would be represented by the third entry on this page. So the number to link it to the in-text citation, the date that content was generated, the prompt the student used to generate the content, and what I think is key, the fact-checking. Students have to provide as many traditional peer-reviewed sources as necessary to verify and validate the factual information in their quoted material. They have to fact-check. I tell students that this fact checking demonstrates three things. First and foremost, you can't trust ChatGPT. It's not a primary source. It hasn't been peer reviewed. It goes off the rails. It hallucinates. So you have to verify. Two, that as an author, we are responsible for the information that we present. It's not sufficient for a student to have factual errors in their paper and then come up to me and say, well, Mennella, that's what ChatGPT said. No, you're the author. You're responsible for the information that lies under your name. And as the author, you have to quality control that paper. You have to fact check. And then the third thing, and I don't think they care so much about this, but this means a lot to me. Even in the post-Gen AI world, there will always be a place for primary sources. We need human beings doing innovative and original work to generate the verified facts. And then if generative AI wants to take those facts and word them in flowery ways with very little effort, okay, more power to it. But the facts have to come from us, from the people. And so there will always be a place for primary literature, for primary research, peer-reviewed research. To see this in action, just as a little bit of an example, let's imagine a student is writing a lab report on organelles, and they've used ChatGPT to generate the paragraph on mitochondria. This is the 6th time in this paper that the student used ChatGPT, and so the information is presented in the paper as so. As the instructor, I read this, I see it's in double quotes, so I know it's been taken verbatim. The student hasn't changed this information at all, and since it's the 6th time they used it, it's ChatGPT, 6. Then, on their ChatGPT citations page, there's entry 1 for the first time they used ChatGPT, entry 2, entry 3, and then the 6th entry gives the date they generated this content, the prompt they used, and in this case, a textbook, Alberts et al., which is like one of the big textbooks in our field. And this is the online version with a hyperlink. If I follow that hyperlink, it brings me to the page where mitochondria are described in Alberts, and this information is verified. So, this technology is here to stay. It's out there, which means it needs to come into the classroom. I've tried to share with you some tips and strategies for integrating this technology into the classroom and give you a sense of how students intend to use it, the impact of that use on their performance, and what they think of this technology, good and bad. So to leave you with 3 slides of final considerations here as I begin to wrap up. First, I think we all have to reconsider what we mean by plagiarism. I think we can all here in the room agree that if a student takes a writing assignment, puts it into ChatGPT, and generates feedback, submits that under their own name, they've plagiarized. And likely, I think we can all agree that if a student never goes near this technology, then they haven't plagiarized. Those are the extremes. But in between there is a whole lot of gray. If a student went to generative AI just to get some ideas around this topic and then did all of the writing themselves, did they plagiarize? I would say no, but I couldn't fault anyone in the audience for maybe saying yes. What if we do what Alex Gill does? The students generated the entire paper with AI, but then they read it, edited it, fact-checked it, made it better. Did they cheat? Did they plagiarize? I would dare say many of us would probably say yes, but not all of us. There's a lot of gray in this spectrum of academic integrity now, and I have a great deal of empathy for students in this complex landscape of post-Gen AI integrity. Have to think of it from their perspective. They go to Mennella's class, and they can use this tool as much as they want, as long as they use his crazy citing style. They go to Professor Blank's class, and if they touch generative AI, they're getting a 0 for cheating. That probably creates a great deal of stress and confusion and complexity for students. So what we can do to mitigate that is first take some time this summer and reflect for ourselves, where is our red line? Where do students go from okay to cheating on this spectrum? And once we've decided that for ourselves, we need to repetitively, redundantly, explicitly beat them over the head with it. It needs to be in our syllabi. It needs to be said out loud in class. It needs to be in the assignment descriptions, because again, they're hearing different things from different classes. We want to be as clear as possible what our policies are, because they're hearing very different policies in different classes. Second set of conclusions, well, from the horse's mouth, what does ChatGPT think of itself in this context? It thinks that it offers immediate feedback, sure enough it does, with its vast amount of knowledge, and it can tailor the learning experience to each individual student, all of which elevates the typical classroom dynamic. It acknowledges its own pitfalls, though, that over-reliance on this technology can diminish critical thinking skills, risk academic integrity issues, and so we have to remain balanced and deliberate as we integrate this technology into our classroom. And looking forward, we have to acknowledge that Gen AI is only going to continue to evolve. So even if we integrate it very nicely and correctly and appropriately into our classes now, soon enough that might not be the case anymore as this technology changes. We have to continuously assess for the adaptability between our classes and the technology, making sure that we're getting the best out of it and mitigating the challenges. I agree with ChatGPT 100% here on all 3 points. To leave you with where I fall, I started this by telling you that I was going to compare and contrast for you the real power of this technology with its false promise. And I'm not sure I did that because it's still very gray. Much like Two-Face on my opening slide, ChatGPT is both simultaneously. It is powerful and it is false promise laden at the same time. It's messy still. And where this scale tips, if it tips in the favor of real power, for us and or for our students, boils down to and distills down to, again, the intention we have in the use, how we intend to use it, and then how we execute on that intention. Intention and application is where this scale tips from real power to false promise, and coaching our students on proper intentions and valid applications is where I think we can best serve them in the classroom in this context. Again, I thank you so much for the invitation to kick us off. I think we're having a really good conversation in this conference. My name and contact information is there on the screen if you'd like to keep the conversation going with me outside of this conference. And we've got the balance of our time for open discussion. Thanks so much, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I just posted that for this 15-minute Q&A, feel free to raise your hand or write it in. So I will probably do, I'll start with the list. There's quite a lot going through the chat right now. So for the first question, would you recommend the Pro account for ChatGPT for educational use?
Not anymore. So I would have 3 weeks ago, but my understanding is when the release of the Omni, the ChatGPT 4.0, I think they're calling it, a lot of those pro features are now included in the free account. I haven't played with the free Omni account because I am the pro user, but I think you can make those bots even in the free account now, or at least some version of them. So I would encourage anybody who wants the extra bells and whistles to play with the free version first and see how far it takes them, and then if they need even more power or more capability, they can consider the pro account then.
All right, Clarissa, you want to ask your question?
I will put my camera on. Yeah. So in the question that you did, you asked the students to do one group did with ChatGPT and the other not. One used the AI to do the writing. And would it be that the students that did without using it would be the more confident ones? So then I would like to point, would it be dangerous that the weaker students will go to ChatGPT more than the strongest ones? And then this makes a loop of misuse of this instrument? Yeah.
I think it's a really great question. I have no satisfying answer. I'll kind of advocate on both sides of that. In the study, I should have mentioned it, but students self-selected. So to your point, it's quite possible and likely that the students, the weaker students, the ones that were less comfortable with writing, did use the technology. And if you go to the paper, there's a lot more data in there. We got some really rich pre-response data from them. And to your point, a good number of the students that chose not to use it spoke to, I like the way I write, I'm comfortable with the way I write, I want to write to get better at this skill. So that's definitely part of what's going on there. The other side of that, though, is, and I could be wrong, I would imagine English professors would get all over me on this. At least for me, well, let me say it this way. I've always struggled with scientific writing. I've gotten pretty proficient with it, but I was never a strong writer. I was one of the people where my doctoral advisor would hand me like a bucket of red paint that basically looked like what my paper was. But I would also, grant me the lack of humility perhaps, I would also say that I deeply understood my content, my discipline. The molecular genetics, I knew. I could verbalize it well. I knew my project. I knew my discipline. I was well versed. I just wasn't a very successful scientific writer. And there's a possibility that some students in that cohort that used it fall into that category, where it's not that they lack the expertise in the field, they lack the writing chops. And is it important that everyone learn to write at some level of proficiency? I mean, I got there, yeah, and maybe we want to agree, like, yes, it's important. But I would dare say it's not critical at this point with this technology. There can be a world where really bad writers who are really expert in their field generate really good written work using generative AI as a crutch. So the answer to your question is very murky, but you're hitting on all of the issues that I think we need to be discussing right now.
Yeah. And I think, yes, and this would be very good for us. I'm in Brazil, I'm Brazilian, so it's very good to review our writing.
Right.
Because, yeah, but yeah, not to generate a text, but review our English writing.
Exactly, like the calculator you have to check your arithmetic, right? You did the long division and then you put it through the calculator to make sure you were right. That kind of model.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. This actually segues pretty well. The next question is, what do you recommend in those types of courses where students perform exams on their own? And how can you know we are assessing the student and not the AI?
Oh, like a open book kind of. Is that a take-home exam or online exam? Is that what? Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, major issue, right? I do not allow students to use generative AI on any assessment, right? Writing assignments is one thing because that's where the writing skills are needed, but I don't let them use it for assessments. And if I was teaching an online class or I had take-home exams, I would not be comfortable with students using generative AI on those. How we get around that, we could speak to LMS proctoring tools. There are services out there where you can, have an exam be proctored online. But if the question is asking, do I think generative AI should be integrated into take-home asynchronous assessments? I do not think they should be. And I'll add on two levels. One, it gives them access to information that they might not have mastery of themselves. But two, more recently, after my study was done, I had a student in an upper level cell biology lab who wanted to use generative AI. And I said, yeah, sure. He was not a native English speaker. So I said, okay, fine. I said, but do me a favor, just to make sure that you're using it appropriately, send me your rough draft. Send me your paper that you've written, and then you could submit the final draft, the Gen AI draft. I just want to see what you've done and how much you let Gen AI do. And the Gen AI made his paper so flowery and so prosy that it compromised some of the clarity and some of the accuracy of the information that he gave. So I graded the AI version because that's the version he wanted final. But I met with him and I said, you would have gotten a higher score with the other paper. Granted, it wasn't as well written, like if we just go to the writing style, but it was a better scientific paper. And I would hedge against it for that reason too. There are times where generative AI can lead students wrong. Like our students don't have a lot of confidence in their clarity of understanding. Even when they know the answer, they're not sure they are right. So if Gen AI comes back with something different, they're likely going to trust the expert, the source of information, and change their own understanding. And I don't think we want them doing that either.
Yeah. So just by the way, everyone, if you want to add some more clarity to your questions after I read them, feel free to unmute. Another question, if students use AI to phrase explanations, might this put them at a disadvantage when it comes to exams that include short answer essay type questions?
It depends on how the instructor is grading those answers. So I can only speak for myself, but I tell my students I give a lot of free response answers, essay-based questions, and I tell them bullet points are fine, drawings are fine. In fact, I encourage them to draw. It's a time saver. So if students are losing points for the mechanics of writing on exams, then yes, likely using generative AI is going to hurt them as well because they're getting less practice on the mechanics of writing. But if students in our classes are being coached and mentored to use Gen AI to polish their writing skills, but the expertise, the knowledge, and the understanding must come from them, then if they have that knowledge and understanding and mastery, that'll show up in their exams. And if they can't write well, at least in my classes, if they can't write well, it's fine. You got the picture, you've got the sentence fragment, you've got the idea, full credit.
Okay. This is actually a question I had. Do you have an opinion on the generative AI sources like Perplexity, the tool, the more science type ones that cite their sources? Do you think they'll be better or worse for students?
So Perplexity is almost like Google on steroids as far as I've used it. Its interface is much more like a search engine than a conversational bot. To me, the best accountable Gen AI tool is Microsoft's Bing Copilot add-on. So if you use ChatGPT through Microsoft's browser, it does a real-time scouring of the internet in addition to its database, and it gives hyperlinks. Within the actual information, factual information is hyperlinked to its source. And then you can follow the hyperlink and see, is it the new American Scientist, or is it, Jim's basement barn of biology information? You can vet the source by following the hyperlink. I think there's some greater accountability there, but I'm the biggest fan of use the Gen AI tool you're comfortable with, take what it spits out, no matter how referenced or sourced it might be, with a very healthy grain of salt, and then the user as the expert and the fact checker verifies that information, regardless of how well cited it might seem to be in the tool.
So I'm gonna slightly change this question. So this is how do you consider the students' contributions to a ChatGPT oriented assignment? In other words, how do you differentiate the student and the versus the bot answers? Is that the intention of your citation style?
No, well, the intention of my citation style is to drive home the point to the students and to make sure that they have fact checked, that they're not trusting the information that the tool generates and that they have verified that information. To the participants' question, the most common strategies that I've seen around those concerns have been having students submit, like I said for my students, submit the original work and the final work, like pre and post Gen AI input, and or have a journal, a log that they have to submit along with the assignment. So students have to log every time they use this technology and in what way they used it, almost like a diary, and then they submit that along with the final assignment. So I've seen versions of those strategies to have a very clear sense of an instructor. What did the student do here, and what did generative AI do? And what's interesting is most of those ideas are actually derivatives of the old ideas we've all had for student group work, right? When students were doing group work and we had the same concerns, a lot of us opted to, well, I want every individual student to write a very short narrative. What was your contribution to the group project? We're just asking students to do that in a one-sided way as they use generative AI.
We have two more questions. I hope we can get through them, that everyone's okay with that, and then we'll have a 10-minute break. This is a great one. So if doing a written assignment on one's own original work has typically been the way to demonstrate the highest level of synthesis of material, what will replace it to demonstrate that skill if all writing becomes kind of AI assisted? Or maybe that skill is no longer essential.
So this, I think, could be, a 20-minute conversation. I will say that I don't think the skill of the mechanics of writing are going to be needed much longer out there. I think generative AI is only going to improve, and more writing is going to be outsourced to generative AI. So from that aspect of the question, I don't think students need those skills. I don't think they'll be using those skills, and I think generative AI is going to replace those skills. What I think the question asker is really getting at is a point that I agree with 100% and I'm very worried about. When we sit down to write, connections are made in our understanding that weren't made prior to the action of writing. Right? That's why a lot of us outline before we put a paper together. That's why a lot of us in graduate school took nothing but essay-based exams. That synthesis of knowledge occurs when we ask ourselves, how do I communicate this to someone else? This is why you never fully understand something until you have to teach it to someone else. It's the same thing. How do I understand this holistically so that I can deliver it to another person? And I think the question and answer, if they're implying that that's going to be lost in a post-generative AI world, I, I'm fearful of that as well.
Okay, and one last question. Great questions, everyone. Since students do not appear to know much about AI, do you have any recommended sources for AI literacy, modules, material that faculty can offer students?
Yeah, for sure. So they've gotten a bad rap in the past. Course Hero used to be a plagiarism site, one of these sites where you could put in a question prompt and buy a previous student's paper. But over the last 5 years or so, Course Hero's really gone to great pains to not be that anymore. They've created engaging student activities to bolster learning. They don't sell papers wholesale anymore. They have a lot of instructor resources as well. And they recently put out an entire module for exactly what this individual is asking for. It's like a lesson plan, even though none of us use, well, I don't use lesson plans, but it's almost like a mini module lesson plan for students to become initially engaged in AI in a very guided and deliberate way. And then there are instructor resources that go along with it. So you almost have like your own cheat sheet as the teacher, and then the activities to take the students through. I didn't use that yet, but I looked at it pretty thoroughly and I was impressed with what they put together. So that's one example of what is out there for those kinds of uses.